hand over to Ray, who's going to host our topic tonight and also introduce our guests. So thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Lair, and welcome to everyone out in the virtual world. We've got a lot of people who are online today, so thank you for joining us. If you have any questions, shoot them through and Rachel will try and direct them towards us and the panel. So thank you so much for giving up the time. We have an amazing panel here today in the sense that they've all in leadership positions in some way, shape or form now in shaping what will become the future of leadership in Western Australia and possibly internationally, we don't know. But the fascinating thing and the connection between all three of these people is that they've all come through from a teaching background. So we're going to dig into that. Please, if you have any questions along the way, because again, this is very organic in the way that it goes. I do have a list of questions I'm going to not so much work through, but guide the conversation. But if there's a question that really probes, you want to probe into, don't hesitate to ask it. And then that may guide where we go with the conversation. On the far side, we have Darren A. Bryant, for anyone who follows him on LinkedIn, as Rachel.
I tagged the wrong Darren Bryant. He was quick to let me know. Right, Darren A. Bryant. So
Darren has had an interesting career in that he was a teacher. He's spent a considerable amount of time in the Hong Kong system where he did his doctorate, and he's now with Curtin University. We got Meika Pfeiffer-Gough, who was in the public education system, moved into the AISWA system as a teacher / deputy, then into the principalship, and now leads within that framework of leadership. And we have Fiona McBeath, who heads up the leadership and number of the programs we've got in here. But again, she's come through the system as a teacher. So what I'm actually going to ask each of the panelists, I'm going to start with you, Darren, if you could give us to start off with maybe a 3-5 minute brief of your history from where you were in education to where you are now, and I'll just work through.
Sure. So I'm actually Canadian. You might tell from my accent I'm not from these parts. But when I finished my Bachelor of Education in Vancouver a few decades ago, I guess now, I ended up having the opportunity to work in Hong Kong, and I was trained as a history and social sciences teacher. And so I got a job working at a small kind of newer school where I was the only history and social sciences teacher at the secondary level for a few years. And as the school grew and took on new teachers, I kind of realized, gosh, we need to get a little bit organized with our curriculum. And so I made some suggestions to the principal. And after a few months, he sort of said, well, maybe you should become the head of the social sciences department, right? Which then sort of expanded to the humanities departments and ended up with about a dozen teachers in that. So that was sort of unexpected. So I think that kind of ties into our theme a little bit. I wasn't expecting that at all. I thought I was just doing my work as a teacher. So anyway, after a few years in that role, I was wanting to do my master's degree, and I approached my principal and I said, look, I really want to do my master's. I'm having a hard time juggling the work and academic life because I was trying to do part-time and my distance. And the principal said, look, we value you. Why don't you take a sabbatical and we'll give you some money. Just come back and do 2 years and we'll make you the K-12 curriculum leader. And again, I was not expecting that. And I said, okay. So I did that, and I ended up back on the senior leadership team. And for about 2 years to finish my commitment. And then I thought, well, I enjoyed the academic life. And by then I'd been 12 years in schools. And I thought, well, if I'm going to do something different, I better try now. So I decided to do my doctorate, which I did at Hong Kong U because it was affordable primarily. and just as I was finishing, a job opened up at another university in Hong Kong, which I took as a junior academic. And there again, after a couple years in that role, the dean approached me and said, look, there's a leadership role opening up in the department. I think you should consider applying for it. So I talked to a few colleagues and they said, yeah, we think yeah, you should apply. So I did apply. It was competitive, but I ended up in that position. And, 12 years down the road from there, position came up here at Curtin. So that was 2 years ago, I arrived. And, again, the position of a deputy head came up and a couple of people said, oh, I think you should apply for that. And I think, really, I'm just newly arrived. Is this a good idea? And yeah, so I applied. And so I guess if I have a theme in my sort of leadership experience, it's a little bit of other people kind of guiding me into it as opposed to me necessarily seeing myself as the leader. You know what I mean? So
There seems to be a bit too of that being in the right place at the right time. And I know there's a bit of a common thread. Get into that with the other members of the panel, but right place, right time.
Yeah.
And for your life as well.
for life as well. Yeah.
So there's for listeners and for our people online, that's one of the hard parts about leadership. You can try as much as you want, and then when you're not expecting something, those opportunities come up. So it's being prepared in that space. Meika, you fascinate me as I was doing a dig through your history, and you've been an ECE, early childhood teacher, you've done science, you've done phys ed, you've been a primary teacher, you were in the aspirant deputies pool, I'm not sure for how long, I'm curious into that, with the Department of Ed, a big block of time within the Department of Ed, and then you moved into Immaculate Heart and within a year, deputy principal.
I know, it astonishes me. I've been on this whirlwind of, I was just saying, professional learning for the last 4 or 5 years. So I will say, a Sydney girl, born and raised, always knew I wanted to be an educator, and primary specifically. I loved the diversity of being a generalist in a whole lot of different areas. I finished year 12 in Sydney and then decided, much to my parents' dismay, to defer, and wanted to try something different and just not study for a little while, which I did. 5 years later, decided to go back to university and do my degree. So I felt like I was ready. I had a lot of life skills that I wouldn't have had I gone straight from year 12, which I really believed helped, for the type of professional that I become going into a school. Fast forward a little, I then transferred over from New South Wales to WA and went into the department system over here. So did a year's contract up in the Northern Districts and won a position the following year and got permanency. Loved it. Thoroughly did all of those different teaching. So I did, I wasn't early childhood trained, was put into a year 1 classroom and it scared the life out of me. I then, moved all around the school and then out of the classroom into some specialty areas. Now, I had that little calling to be in the leadership area, and I was at the right place at the right time as well, if we're looking at themes, and learned to just never say no to anything. So I then tried a little systemic role when national quality standards came out, and did some auditing work around WA, which was really, really good for me as well, exposure-wise. And then we decided to have a tree change from the coast and buy some acreage, which is how I ended up at Immaculate Heart College. So it's just on the fringes, and thought that I would retire there. That's how I thought of things, and I was definitely challenged. So I enjoyed my time there, but it went so quickly moving from a classroom role into a leadership that I feel like I fell into. It definitely wasn't planned. But I will say the main foundations for me in that role were that I couldn't have fallen into leadership at a worse time, to be totally honest. The college was growing into secondary, which was brand new to me. So I was forming that part of the college. We had a massive expansion. So I fell into a lot of HR and recruitment. We had re-reg, which I'd never been through in my life. It was just phenomenal. And from my short time that I feel like I was in leadership there, AISWA must have noticed something in me, and I was offered a role with them. So I thought, okay, well, I'm saying yes to everything. I'm going to give this a go. And I've been there 3 years now, still learning every day.
And that re-registration process for ACEL schools, that's enormous, isn't it? That's not
Huge.
For department schools, it's literally, well, it's not, but it's all intents, but tick box.
Yes,
That's rigorous. So as
Yeah.
a new principal, that must have been absolutely brutal.
it was. Yeah, it was. Yeah, I didn't get much sleep during those 6 months. Also, I must say, not realising, coming from the department, that in an independent school, you're the CEO as well.
Yep.
So wearing 2 hats, it was just a fast forward learning curve for me.
I'm going to jump into that before I get to Fiona. So that's a huge job, the re-registration and registration. Where was that modelled for you? Where was your training for that? Or was that literally, I'm on page 1, I've got to get to page 2, then I'm 1 page ahead of the reassessment? Yeah.
I lent into AISWA consultants. I lent into the government, non-government schools, governance area. I just put my feelers out and asked a million questions. Yeah, that's how I got through that. Yeah, it was eye-opening.
Impressive. And we'll explore that because that's where your policy stuff's going to come in. Fiona, same thing. You've started off in the Little League when we're in the classroom and playing with little people. You actually dabbled as an assistant director.
Yeah.
For a month if you linked in. Yeah.
Yeah.
And now you're actually part of the programs or supporting the department with their programs. Share your journey with us.
Yeah, very similar themes as well. And right place, right time, very much had people around me with that messaging of say yes to every opportunity. Nothing's bad is going to happen at saying yes.
Unless you have to do a
Well,
We'll survive.
yeah, and in saying that, there
Yeah.
were some moments that I also went, what have I done? And so started in the classroom, and you know, before that, I'm a country girl. I'm from Balladon country, so I'm used to dealing with sheep and crops and headers. So when I was in the classroom, that felt really good and fine dealing with students. But very quickly, I think I realised that I loved working with my colleagues as well. So not just the students, but people around me. I loved sharing what I've done here and there and learning from other people. So I think that's where my first steps into leadership came, when people kind of said, look, do you mind getting some teams together to help with this and that? Sorry. So I really enjoyed that side of things. And I taught around different schools in the state, different roles. Year 7 was kind of where I loved being. I never went to kindy till I was in my principalships, visiting and getting covered in glitter, which I loved. But that at that time wasn't for me. I took a bit of a break, and when I had my children, as we do as females, I decided that was when to do my masters while I was having my children. So got through that.
That's
That's what we do, don't we? Yes. And so that really gave me an eye opener to international and national kind of trends and theories in education, and that really ignited a passion in me. And so I actually then took some leave and we went overseas. And I got thrown into a school in Windsor, UK. They loved Australian teachers at the time. We were the buzz. And they asked if I could start in this 2IC role of a nursery school. And I didn't know what that was, and we needed money. So I was like, yes, sure, I'll do it. Within a month, I was in charge as headmistress, and an Ofsted was given to us. I don't know if anyone's been through an Ofsted in the UK. Yeah, I hadn't. But it's really interesting. And what was funny really was going through that process, very similar. I relied on the governors there and people around me to tell me what this was. what they didn't tell me is that people did literally come with a checkboard and tick and view things and watch, which I thought was a waste of time. So I made them sit and do, different reading lessons in circle and take the children these places, which I put them to use, which was never done. And I thought we were going to get shut down, but they loved it. And I just played very nice. But coming back to Australia, I realised that that had given me some good experience. And from there, right place, right time, got a bit of a push from some previous mentors to apply for some deputy jobs, and won some roles. And then from there, moved through different roles into principalships. And I was a very young principal, I will say, and I really relied on my peers around me to help me through challenges and help me work out how do we do this. And things have changed a lot since I started in my principalship. So the topics and the questions today, I'm really quite excited to talk about.
Haven't heard of it.
We haven't.
So let's use that then as a link to jump in, and I'll start with you when we talk about what counts as leadership in our schools, or we ask that question, what counts as leadership in our schools? That Ofsted example you just gave, obviously there's a process that they go through, and it's probably one up from the AISWA pre-registration, but maybe a little bit more brutal in the way the press deal with it. But there's a model of leadership there in the sense that you're meant to tick the boxes, but you stepped outside of that. So what counts as leadership in schools, and then who gets to decide that? And obviously in this case, it sounds like you were.
Yeah, I think, given that feels like many eons ago, it was a while ago. So it was a very hierarchical process there, very top-down approach. And remembering with an Ofsted, you've got a board of governors and that kind of thing. We're looking at those checks as well. I would probably say now my view of leadership, I think we're both probably going to have a lot of this today, has changed so much. To me, in schools, there are leaders at every level, and I think that's an important message that we need to continue to deliver. We have leaders in our classrooms, we have our EAs and AIOs who are leading, so leadership looks very different. To me, leadership in schools is about impact and influence, and that happens at every leader, at every level in our school. And it happens directly with our students, but also with our communities and our families as well. And I would also, when we think about who gets to decide, I think the tide is turning, and who gets to decide actually if someone's going to lead is you. We make that decision. If we truly trust in someone, in their ability, in their character, in their competence, then we will make the choice to allow them to influence us. And that's what real leadership is about, when we make the choice to let that influence apply to us. So you can see now my view of leadership's changed very differently to being a very traditional top-down, that person decides. It's not now the person who's sitting in the front big office of the school.
And do you think that's a direct result of actually being involved in the work of what a leader does?
Yeah, I think from the outside, and possibly being so young as well, I had a mindset of leadership. A mental model of leadership. That had been given to me through what I'd seen growing up through schools and obviously through my career. Some of that mental model was positive, and some of it, as we would all have experienced, wasn't positive. Mm-hmm. So I had to learn very quickly that mental model doesn't have to exist, that I can make it look very different. And when I realised that was a very big awakening.
So Meika, let's, using Fiona's story there, how long did you sit in the aspirant pool, the deputies pool for?
With the department?
Yeah.
3 or 4 years.
And I'm not saying this to be derogatory to that, but when Fiona's saying you get to decide, did you feel like you had any control while you're sitting in that pool? Did anything come from that?
Very little.
So what was the difference then to step out of the system into a new system, bearing in mind you're going down there for a sea change, to then go teacher, boom, principal?
Yeah, I feel that my time with the department at that particular moment and in the particular school that I was in had other ideals about what a leader looked like, what a leader encompassed, and it was quite different to what I viewed as a leader. Yeah. So I feel like I didn't have any hesitation when I was offered a role outside of the department, because I felt like it would take me a long time to get to essentially where I was aiming.
And we must, that was a number of years ago.
It was.
Yeah, early.
Yeah,
Then a lot's changed. We'll explore that with Fiona
Yeah.
a little bit.
yeah.
So where policy, you've heard from two people now about the leadership pathways. Where, and we've actually got something in common because we've both done our doctorate around that leadership space. Where do you see the policies around leadership development and what's actually occurring within schools? Is there a match? Is there a huge disparity between what we're saying a leader looks like and a leader needs to what's actually happening in a school?
Yeah, that's a good question. And being somewhat new to WA, I don't know intimate detail of the policies in WA yet. But I think what I've noticed sort of internationally is different jurisdictions will have pretty well defined standards, I guess you might call them, or sets of competencies around how they view leadership. And that can be helpful, and it can also be challenging. I think there's some tension there. So the helpful side is it might point to certain sets of practices that we know effective leaders need some support or development in. So it might be, for instance, how do we develop people within our organizations? How do you develop leaders within your organizations? And there's been a lot of research around that, and some jurisdictions have adopted that into leadership frameworks, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
So that can help to guide what, say, school leaders do. So it could be helpful when it's used as kind of like a frame that we can use to support people. In some jurisdictions, what you find, though, is policymakers tend to view these as instruments of the government by which they can, every new policy that comes along, well, we can cram this in to the leadership frameworks. So in some places, you see very crowded leadership frameworks in which potential leaders might feel, well, I have to be a superhero in order to be a leader. And, and you might see that replicated in programs where programs just get packed full of information and content, and maybe start veering more towards compliance, administrative aspects, and start to lose track of, well, what's the educational leadership aspect? So I think that's kind of a tension that we see internationally.
Yeah.
I'm not, like I say, I don't know that I can speak to WA in particular. Yes.
There's certainly frameworks for Australia / WA, and I know the department through the Leadership Institute's done a great deal of work around creating pathways and supporting development leaders directly through not through conversations with you, but from what you're saying, those programs have come about because there's a void there.
Yeah.
But yeah. And you and I were both talking too. We're one of the few jurisdictions, although Canada's now another one, and the UK have just done, where there's actually no required qualification to be a principal.
Yeah.
Very much an apprenticeship model.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there again, that that can be very positive, but it could also have tensions. Just as I explained, I do think sometimes, I mean, reflecting on my own personal history and that I've heard other people relate, is sometimes you get into these leadership positions and you don't really know exactly what you're supposed to do. So you maybe do try to follow what your mentor had done, if you're lucky enough to have a mentor in proximity to where you're working. But when I did my master's degree, suddenly it was like a big revelation. Well, these things that I'm thinking work in kind of an intuitive way. Well, now there's actually reasons out there, right? That I can now justify or explain why these work. And just for that reason alone, I think it's sometimes helpful to have that sort of access to training. And then our development, leader development. And then also the network aspect. Sometimes these structures of courses and programs help us to develop networks that we can support, use as support, peer support. So I think there's lots of reasons for good leader development programs and for people to be engaged in it as a help in their development, but not as a strict doctrinaire approach to leadership.
So did you have any mentors that you worked off?
Yeah, I did. So not during my department days.
Yep. Was there a leader during your department days you went, that's,
Yeah, that I looked up to.
Yep.
Certainly. And possibly, Ray, now that I think about it, they were engaging in conversations with me. It just wasn't an official mentor setup, as I know it now. But it probably was along those lines. It wasn't until I got into the independent sector that it became a real that conversations even happened about, you should have an internal on campus and then an external.
Yeah.
Why? I was just asking lots and lots of questions. Why, why, what could they possibly offer me that was different? It was absolutely phenomenal what they offered.
so the AISWA system's actually quite fascinating in that it's very different to both the Catholic education and the department, because and I know Marie's, it's not an umbrella as such, they're more of a guiding support. So with 217 schools, and they're Catholic schools, they're Christian schools, they're all sorts of schools, probably the better known for the PSA schools, your Guildfords and your Harvards, Perth College, etc.
Yeah.
How do you cater programs for leaderships with those such varying contexts, but there's no real power to say you need to do this?
It's a challenge. I will say that. So it just means that you have to be offering contemporary, data-informed programs.
Yeah.
And change that up to a bespoke model for any interested parties. Yeah. I think we could argue leadership's leadership. It doesn't matter if it's AISWA or Catholic Ed. I mean, there are different policies in play, but leadership is leadership. So if we're talking about leadership programs and developing the skills and behaviours, then that applies to all. Yeah.
I feel like from, the continuum, if I'm looking at in the topical leadership area, your aspirant programs, right through to an exec level program, and middle leadership, in there as well. Everybody, because they come from a different campus with a different, I guess they're looking at education through a different lens and with a different focus, whether it be pedagogically, faith-driven, whatever that may be. They each, after they've been through the program, leave with their own takeaways. It's very unique, and it's critical for us to receive feedback on that so that we know, where it's hitting the mark, where it's not hitting the mark, rather than a Guildford Grammar or a Baptist College actually having a bespoke program specifically tailored for them.
So building on that, picking up what you were saying, Fiona, where leadership is leadership. If you look at the contexts within that, if I'm hearing you right, what you're saying is the skills that you learn will go across any role in terms of leadership being leadership with.
Yeah, I think, look, in my humble opinion, I feel, a bit daunting, these doctorates sitting next to me. So to me, it's more about, as a leader, you need to have a set of foundational skills that apply. And those foundational skills, you then build upon as you go through the different levels of different layers of leadership. But it's not so much about anymore what you're doing. There's always going to be a component of what you have to get done operationally and technically, and that is contextual. How that looks at a Catholic school compared to a department school is different because of our policies and initiatives. But the how we lead applies across all. You need to have a deep understanding of those leadership behaviours when you're leading in the classroom, when you're working in middle leadership. And
It's a
then,
disposition.
yeah, absolutely.
Practice.
And ACEL will now refer to the dispositions in the middle leadership standards, which is a really amazing thing to now have to reflect on, because it is about the how of leadership. In the department, we have the attributes. We talk about the 6 personal attributes, which are the dispositions in ACEL language. And you need to have those attributes to be able to be an effective leader. So you need to understand who you are and how to apply those attributes across whatever level of leadership you're in. But the technical side will always be there, and the operational side, but it will just look different in a different context.
And department certainly has, from an outsider's perspective and someone who was around when Jesus was wearing cow boots, there's been a huge growth in the amount of programs and supports. I was saying to Darren earlier that it was pretty much an apprenticeship model. You came in, actually it was before that, you came in, it was literally, you were 300th on the list. When someone passed away, you were now 299th on the list, and then merit selection came in.
Yeah.
There was no training, but now we're seeing middle leaders. We've got the launch program. Do you see those sorts of things as being impactful and playing a big part in the development, particularly for aspirant leaders in that space?
Yeah, the feedback we get is it's really allowing people to look at leadership itself and the complexity of leadership, particularly some of our programs focusing on middle leadership. The complexity in middle leadership is huge, because you're suddenly not doing it yourself. You're suddenly having to influence and lead through others. So you're only ever as successful as your team. If your team is, doing well, you're doing well because you're the leader of that team. And we have some really big learning moments with our middle leaders when we talk about the fact that you're shifting your mindset from doing it all yourself in the classroom to now building up your team, building the capacity so that they can go do it. And it's very hard. I've got a little thing when I present and facilitate, I keep saying to people, stop doing the do. Because you automatically fall back to being a doer, because that's where we all started, in the classroom. That's where we feel comfortable. But as you develop in your leadership, you have to shift your mindset to, right, well, now I need to build the capacity of others so that they can move them along. And then as you move into your principalship, you're actually developing those middle leaders. You're leading leaders. So it becomes even more complex.
So let's jump onto that, because I think that's a really important point that you make there. Do you see that as probably the biggest barrier or challenge for someone in any system coming out of a teaching role to go from the doer to, because it's like you said, it's very easy to go, I can fix that, I can fix that, I can fix that, and meanwhile you're starting to see.
Yeah, we're used to fixing them, and fixing in our jobs in schools, we are very time poor. We've got to be honest about that. So anything that can get it done quickly, we see as a solution. But it's not, we don't want to just quickly fix it. We want to solve it. So we've got to just be careful if we're always fixing, and if we're always that person who's doing it, or if you're always the person doing it, I'm going to come to you and say, hey, do that's
learned helplessness, and you don't want to create those people.
So, I'll handle you another thing, which means you're meant to be leading the team, but you're actually doing all the work for the team, and I can just get on doing what I do. But that understanding is shifting across the department through our programs and the knowledge that's coming through. And I think the department, just coming back to when I first started, which was just after Jesus was long.
He hasn't come back yet.
That's another conversation. And it was that very big shift. So my applications were through merit selection. And when I was doing that, they were based on what at that time. They're very much, what have you achieved, Fiona, what can you do? That will get you the role. Whereas now the department is really understanding that to have the fidelity of leaders, they need to be able to work through the attributes, the mindsets, and understand how to be a leader. That it's not just about the what.
And I would say the same for the independent sector. I feel even 3 years ago, when I joined AISWA and started seeing on a broader scale all of the different schools, it was very much at that point, what have you done? What are your accolades? Where now I'm starting to see that shift in leadership come through. It's still got a long way to go, don't get me wrong, but it's certainly more about the how and your capabilities, as well as what you've achieved. So I think the how of doing things is definitely becoming the focus now, and it needs to, it really needs to.
And that's actually really interesting. A long time ago, I applied for an AISWA school, and working from a department's application where it's 5 pages, that's the criteria, ACEL standards, your resume, to 23 pages that included school counsellor as a primary school student, year 12 captain, played soccer, represented Australia, very different, with a little dabble on leadership, where but the rest was how can you promote our.
Yes.
So it's a completely different view of what leadership looks
It's
like.
you as a product.
Yeah.
And how you appear, how you present, how you arrive, basically.
So we're looking for influences.
Yes.
So how do you, now in the School of Education with Curtin, how do you see that playing out in a School of Education with those people coming into our system, the ones you're training and developing, and how can you see that playing out in
The emphasis on the how. Yeah, I mean, that's a really good a good question. At Curtin, we don't have a leadership program per se, but we do.
I don't think anyone does now.
No, it seems to have disappeared pretty much from the university sector. It is what I'm interested in my own research, though, so I'm continuing to look at it from a research view. Where it might come to play a little bit is in terms of formal programs, is our initial teacher education, where there are units related to leadership and professionalism. Excuse me, and we do try to help novice teachers understand that they actually may very well have roles even informally, around that entail leadership.
Because they're germinating and growing as soon as they enter the school
Absolutely.
campus as a grad. They're germinating and growing in their leadership capacity without even knowing it. And that's as a classroom leader. Essentially, it's a start.
That's right. And this is one of the thoughts that, I mean, as you were speaking before around the how, I'm thinking too, there's this aspect of the degrees of formality. I mean, there are, I believe, a lot of people who do influence colleagues and peers, one direction or another. So perhaps you could call them informal leaders, and as one of you mentioned before, it's, I think you did, it's you are the person who decides who your leader is, who you associate with, who you recognize. So I think helping new teachers understand that they and others may be playing at least an informal leadership role in their schools, and to recognize that, and to say yes to opportunities when they come along, because they might not always be associated with formal titles, but they might be opportunities to try a new aspect to professionalism in the workplace. They might be little tests about, well, is this a potential leader in the school? Is this a person who should have more opportunity? Which is, I think, the flip side to the say yes to everything or never say no. Is that I do believe that leaders who are wanting to develop other leaders do provide opportunity to lead within their schools and organizations. And that might be very well be to sort of see, well, who is there, who is a potential leader? Who, I have limited time, who should I be investing my time in?
Yeah.
You know?
May I ask a question?
Please.
I've heard it said about saying yes, and I'm, a yes person all over. But then we were also saying, other than a rephraser. But then I'm also hearing that once we become a leader more formally, we need to learn to say no.
Yes.
So can we speak about that? Because that's been a hard journey for me as a leader, because it seems like it's the yes people that get the roles, but how do then we switch off that yes
How
person?
do you navigate?
Yeah.
I'm going to add to that question because you touched on a point and I thought of Rachel straight away, that bit about we need to go from being a doer to, but our conversation is often, it's quicker if I do that than invest 7 hours trying to get
Like,
something.
I don't have time
Yeah.
to show you.
And
how
then
to
they
do it.
don't.
Yes.
So
I think
so.
throw that in there
I
too.
think you've kind of answered it well. If I think of it this way, there's a difference between the yes person
Mhm.
and we keep using the word the influencer.
Mhm.
So the yes person just says yes and does everything, and they keep going back to the doing it. The influencer says, how can I help support you with that?
Mhm.
So they've flipped it already in the conversation, and instead of saying, I will go and do that for you, it's what can I do to support you to grow the skills so that you can then go and do it? Because if I keep doing it for you, that takes up this chunk of my day and I can't actually do what I'm meant to be doing in my role. So it's really finding a script to just politely turn that over. And I think we get a lot of research from Sinek, and Simon Sinek would done a lot of, as you would have in your book clubs, a lot of that reading. And he really talks about some leader versus manager kind of research there. And it's very much about if I keep doing it for you, that's where my time goes. I now need to build your capacity to do it yourself. And now I've lost my train of thought. So looking back to me, please.
Can I just say, it doesn't come naturally.
No.
No.
It really doesn't. It's a learnt attribute.
Mhm.
And I can't remember the actual walk, but a bit of, PL's not always signing up to a program and going and doing a class or a uni micro credential. PL's, picking up a walk that's recommended to you or just that you want to explore. There's so much learning, in just doing such a simplified thing such as that. One book that I read, it was something about the cheese. I don't remember.
Oh, yeah, who's told you?
Cheese.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now,
Yes.
Cover.
Yeah, the cover, but that's when I started reflecting, Rachel, on me being that person who just said, yeah, look, let me do it. I can do it with my eyes closed, until 100 of those things all chopped at me,
Yeah.
and then I couldn't actually get my work done. But it was intentional
Mhm.
that I had to start trying to do that and just chip away at it.
Yeah.
Now, I feel like in, when I have a say in programs for aspirants, I mention that
Mhm.
straight away, because I feel like that can be years down the track before you actually realise
Yeah.
that
You're drowning.
yeah, absolutely. And then the burnout, and then the rest of it, and then it's all focused on what am I, incapabilities, but it's not. It's just
Well,
learning
imagine
to.
if you're asked to do something, you do it and then you can't do it. You've got that added pressure
Yes.
through this person's
And that's
job.
real
but-
too.
The guilt.
Yeah.
It's a
I'll
question.
come to you.
I actually had to put a script on the back of my door.
Oh,
I
right.
actually
Yeah.
wrote a sentence so that I could physically see
Yeah.
it, because I knew that people would be
Yes.
coming through, and if
Yeah.
I could quickly see that, I'd think, right, okay, flip it.
Yeah, yeah.
That's how bad the habit was.
Yes.
I would just add like maybe a qualifier to this, never say no
Yeah.
aspect. It is, ideally, this leader development process is a two-way street. So, I would be hopeful that a turned on senior leader in a school would not just be dumping, all kinds of miscellaneous work
Mhm.
downward. It's, oh, I've got lots of compliance documents to do. Can you do it, right? I'm hoping that when we say like opportunity to lead, that we're talking about like authentic leadership opportunities that are suited
Yeah.
for that person, you know, and being aware, some people are like really good at administrative work, but maybe aren't so good at like identifying growth
The
and improvement
relational.
areas and the
Yeah,
relational.
yeah.
So different people have these different capacities. So, I mean, again, so hopefully if a school leader has this, you know, part of my role is to develop other people and they're serious about it, they're also attuned to these kinds of nuances.
Yeah.
It doesn't help the person if they're just the dumping ground of work that needs doing, right?
I think you're
Yeah.
really there in capturing that mindset shift that has to happen. So we talked about that earlier, that once you move out of the classroom into those first leadership roles, even if it's with a small team, the mindset shift is I have to build the capacity of other people to do. And I can only do that if I form those habits. And one of the things that helped me, other than the script on the door, was every time I did it was realizing that I'm actually stopping someone else from developing by doing it.
Yeah.
So really going, right,
You're
I'm
doing
just
better than
taking
yourself.
someone else's opportunity.
Getting
Yeah.
pointed looks by the panel. All caught on camera, fine.
Yeah.
All right.
The other question that it's kind of a statement and a question is that over time, and now that we're seeing a new iteration of teacher standards, middle standards, the Australian standards for middle leaders, Australian standards for principals, standards for teachers, there's always that now we see the personal and the professional learning, sort of that our acknowledgement that our personal development and well-being has to be part of that story.
Yes, yes.
So also, but the flip side of that is that quite often leaders, in their efforts to keep their teachers who want to stay in the classroom safe and well nurtured, and or will often cut off some part of their agency to say, well, actually, I'd like to go to that conference or that professional learning in my holidays or in my after school, but we have got some leaders who say, no, rest. You need to be, well rested for the rest of the term. So I guess, how do you find in your courses that you're running, what messaging are you putting out there to potential leaders and how to find that balance between their personal, their professional, without sacrificing the agency as teachers, as potential leaders or leaders from the classroom? How does that, is there any part of your courses that?
It's really complex. All of our courses, in terms of leadership development courses, have wellbeing components. And that's not only because it's a priority with the department at the moment, wellbeing of staff and students, but again, it's that shift in knowing that we can't have effective, sustainable leadership in our system if we're going to burn everyone out. So one of the thoughts or the mindsets that we're trying to shift is that it's not about work-life balance. It's because there is no balance. It's just about work-life management. So like this week for me, it's a little bit less frantic than, a week ago when I might have been facilitating every day and running out to school board training. But I manage that because I move things around. I don't try and balance it, because if I'm in that mindset of trying to make everything balance perfectly, it's never going to happen. And I'm going to end up, in a burnout kind of way. Yeah, so it's really important that we talk about management. We give little tips and hints as well of how to do it, and perhaps some helpful conversations to consider. But there's also a really big component of well-being where it's like a knowing doing gap. You've got to drink your water and eat your veggies, like we all know it, but we don't do it.
Yeah.
And if I'm your principal, I can keep telling you about it, but you actually have to go and do it, not me. So it's kind of like lead the horse to water, but I can't force them to drink. So well-being is actually, I can model it for you as a leader, but I can't do it for you.
Yeah.
That's up to you.
I like how you talk about the balance there, because I've got two recent examples, Marie, that have just been eye-opening, I guess. we are the same. We embed wellbeing into, you know, a lot of our programs in some way, shape or form. But I feel like it got to a point where everyone was rolling their eyes at a particular point saying, yeah, no, this stuff. I know I need to breathe in and out for 10 seconds or whatever. But last week, this is one example at the ACEL Middle Leaders Summit, and I'm not saying this to plug it, but there was an exceptional masterclass by Amy Green, and it was about looking after yourself while leading others. Really game changing, and it isn't just about breathing in and out 10 times.
Yeah, on Saturday.
Yeah, exactly. And then I did go along to have a little sneak peek on a Saturday at a whole day event at ECU just recently, and they were running a micro-credential in the same space. It was too cheap not to take up. It was $50. That wouldn't have even
Wow.
covered the catering. And Phil and I were both talking about going, but he volunteered for me to go. Anyway, it was phenomenal. So really data informed, contemporary, you know, the facilitators were phenomenal. And I took a lot away that I will then use to embed into some of our programs at that level now. Yeah, so I agree. It's about the balance. It's not just about the well-being. This is, you know, these are the things you must do it. It's about finding that balance. And if your X, Y, and Z don't fit into this week, just do your X, balance it, whatever that X is.
Excellent. I want to jump. I know you wrote a paper, Darren. I can't remember the exact wording of it, but it's something around how do principals impact or influence policy?
Yeah.
I know both these systems, particularly the Department of Ed system, has actually been, and I mean reactive in a good way to the feedback they've got from principals in terms of we need structure, we need support for these young people coming through, young people being young leaders, not necessarily youngish. How did that paper come about, and what were the outcomes of that in terms of how do principals actually impact policy? Because this is pretty much policy development when we're talking about structured programs within organisations.
Yeah, this was kind of an interesting study that I really had the privilege to work on. It was a joint study with colleagues in the UK and then our team in Hong Kong. And so that was the question, you know, how do principals influence policy? And this was primarily, but we did do, it was a quantitative and a qualitative study. And just to give you just a very brief skinny on the Hong Kong system, there's some similarities to here in that there is a large body of government funded schools, and there's a Catholic system, and there's an Anglican system, and there's an independent school system. So it's similar in that sense. The large group of purely government funded schools, what differs is that the government doesn't manage them directly. Other bodies, NGOs, hospitals, religious organizations. So it differs in that sense. So what we did is we went and we interviewed principals and middle leaders for the most part to inquire about, well, what do you do, first of all, with mandated policies? Because Hong Kong, like a lot of places, and the UK as well, there were many, many, many policies. And what principals told us, there were a few things that were interesting, is one, the principals of these schools, which were all selected as high achieving and improving schools, regardless of the socioeconomic class of or status of students they were serving. So we tried to distribute that aspect around. What they seemed to have in common was they had a really clear sense of school vision. And so they said, look, some policies are enabling, like we can use them to our advantage to meet our school vision. You know, some are kind of benign and some are a little bit distracting. So, you know, the ones that are enabling, we put a lot of energy into, right? And we use them as leverage, right? And I'll come back to your question in a minute. Sorry, I realized I'm a little off, but
I'm talking to an ADHD, so I'm still with you.
Okay, good. And the, you know, the second and third groups, of like the sort of benign ones and the distracting ones, the principals basically said, if governments want reports, we can write reports. You know, like we can deal with things on an administrative level with some policies. It's just tick box. We don't need to divert a lot of human energy into it. We can focus though our energies on the ones that really matter for our students and our families and the community, which kind of goes back to your point about leadership as leadership, but it's also, as I think you were implying, leaders understanding the context that they're operating in and whose needs they're trying to meet, right? And so you can shape the enactment of policy in that sense. So influencing policy by how you enact it and what you prioritize and what you might buffer staff members from, you know, as opposed to engage them with. So there's that aspect. And then the other aspect is that some of these principles we found, if they didn't see the resources within the system, they went out and found the resources. So it might have been another curriculum opportunity for some of the more independent sorts of schools. It might have been finding different, what was it called now? There's kind of a invitational education is what one school principal grabbed on. So like a framework or a structure that would be enabling for the teachers and students. And what they did then is they fed their success stories back into the government. And in some cases, you could see like the schools actually leading the government policy. And later the government adapting or adopting some of these practices into their policy. And so we found that to be fairly consistently true in both the Hong Kong and the UK context.
So through storytelling,
There's
essentially.
Yeah.
Wow. But we've seen that with our system. I can't speak to the AISWA system, but building on from that and catching up the point you said earlier, Fiona, and Meika, you sort of you nodded your head to this. Not everyone wants to be a principal or a deputy. But so how do we nurture that leadership space and encourage people to take that step into leadership without having to jump into the fire of a re-registration with AISWA or face an Ofsted board in your first leadership gig?
Yeah. So I have a real passion for those educators who don't have that drive to want to be an administrator in a school, but still want to have influence and still want to give back and mentor. And it's in the pedagogical space. So I know you would know more about the department side on this, and I work with the director who oversees level 3 and dealing with your union on things. But our equivalent is the highly accomplished and lead teacher accreditation. And I'm such an advocate because a lot of the educators are leaders in their own right now, and they have so much substance, so much goodness to give and share and mentor and bring along people, but their passion is still in the classroom. So I think what I love about the highly accomplished and lead teacher process is that they can do that. They get recognised and esteemed for their professional expertise, but they don't want to move, you know, singularly into that role that's got the title of principal or deputy principal. Yeah, sure, they might become a coordinator or a head of an area, but they still have influence both inside where it counts with the students, where their passion is, and with their colleagues, and then still get to influence at that leadership level, just not as they know it or as people looking in see it, and that's at the top.
I've certainly seen that in my school with an amazing teacher who had that opportunity and said, "Oh, you know, I've tasted it. I actually want to be with the kids," but their influence is significant across the school.
Absolutely. but they're, you know, and they should be esteemed, they should be honoured
Yeah.
in that regard. They are keeping the education of our future generation. They're future focused. That's what they are. They're not going to step into a leadership role where that's just a side, you know, fuzzed out little effect, and the managerial and administration tasks take over. And they know they don't want that. You know, I think they should be really held up on a pedestal, those educators.
Fiona?
Yeah, look, I don't think we should be trying to get everyone to jump into leadership, if I'm honest. I fully believe that people need to be ready. So there's a readiness aspect of this, and we can't force someone to be ready. I know in my principal roles, I would often see some of our teachers who were just absolute guns in the classroom. They had so much impact on their students and their families directly. And I guess from a principal lens, I would selfishly think, I'd love to have them now doing this, because you're recognising leadership behaviours. But when I would approach them, they'd say, no, I'm happy here. This is where I want to be. And then it's about, well, is there opportunity? Because, you know, as a principal, I'm accountable for providing leadership at every level of my school and opportunity to develop at every level. So how can I develop them from within the classroom? And that comes down to a good conversation, but, you know, can they model what they're doing in the classroom? Can they mentor grads? You know, what can we do that keeps them in front of the students where their passion is? And in the department, that is the true intent of the level 3 classroom teacher program. That is why.
And the senior 1 and 2 now.
Yeah, that's why it was developed. And, you know, we've just got to shift that mindset or that mental model, I guess, that we have, which is a bit traditional of leadership, that it is about those people who are able to get the deadlines done and, you know, will speak up and, yes, you know, do this and this. It is often about our kind of not as extroverted, our introverted leaders who are having deep impact with our students.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I agree. They're absolutely on a pedestal. Yep.
Do you think we have to work harder with creating these pathways to leadership, given, and this is the dark cloud, the challenges and the expectations that are being put on leaders now, and the roles and the demands of their jobs? Probably, if I look at the AISWA, you're a principal of the school, but you literally answer to a board. We don't have that issue in the state system. How do we keep those pathways open at the same time and create those pathways and encouragements for leadership, when at the same time the storyline, the headline is leaders drowning?
For me, I think there's a big role for our current leaders and principals in schools to play about a little bit of gatekeeping, what to let in and what to leave out, so that you know, we can really focus on what matters, which is always students, because when students drop out of the conversation, there is a problem. They should always be in the conversation. But also, you were talking about policies before, and to me, yeah, it does. How can we influence up as principals and say, yes, this policy exists and it's beneficial, but I don't have time right now because I need to focus on this and that. So there's a little bit of gatekeeping, I think, that comes into play as part of our leadership roles. And it's just also about understanding that we are accountable to develop others. That's our purpose as leaders. As you know, you come back to it, a leader is as good as the people around them. And if you're not developing the people around you, then you're stuck doing it all yourself.
And
now I'm looking at
that
you,
obviously
Rachel.
happened.
Yeah.
Someone saw you and went,
Yeah.
let's get you up.
Yeah.
Was there a level of anxiety in that, given that there's no
Absolutely.
formal training as such?
Yeah, absolutely. I had and still struggle with imposter syndrome. I was told recently that it's not a thing. It's just I've got gaps in my mind that I need to fill. But I still yeah, I definitely did. I just thought, what, they're going to find out soon that I do not have all of these capabilities. I might, you know, fake it, but I definitely don't have them. But I'm just on this constant learning curve of leaning into people and then thinking, I do know, or I do have an opinion about that, and I'm allowed to have an opinion about that. Yeah, I certainly, struggled with that immensely. It's easing off a little bit now.
And in Darren's case, Fiona, you said you got to be ready. But you said it at the start, Darren, you didn't think you were ready,
Yeah.
but someone said,
That's right.
so is it that you were ready but didn't realise it and needed that nudge, or?
Yeah, it's really kind of funny. I mean, let me share something personal and then something from the research. Right? The personal experience was yeah, I actually took on sort of an accreditation thing as well in the school. And that was like the accreditation body was doing an external review and the school hadn't been doing that well. And the main reason was the principal, who was, he'd been around a long time, right? And he kind of did the old bureaucratic authoritarian approach to it, and yeah, didn't involve people, just did the checklist, and yeah, the accreditation team actually suggested to the incoming principal that I could be someone who might support the process. So we have that in common too. That was kind of but I didn't think of myself as a leader. I just was trying to be a good teacher and work on the curriculum and that kind of a thing. So it did take someone else. So to kind of, in most of my roles, someone else to kind of give me the nudge, because I never really saw myself as a leader. I was really interested in educational change and the change process and this kind of thing, which kind of you need leaders to do change, but I didn't see that because I'm thinking of the, you know, the charismatic person in the front of the room, and I'm not that person, you know. So it took someone to give me a nudge. Now, what's interesting is some colleagues in New South Wales have written a paper recently on, they've been engaged in a big leader development program there. And in a survey they did of a couple thousand middle leaders, they were asking them about their, you know, process towards, you know, leadership. And a very cute. So about half of them had leadership ambitions, but the other half ranged from, they weren't interested at all. It was just, you know, there was a gap that needed filling to, and then I think next to the, you know, having real designs for leadership, the next largest group was they had some kind of an experience. It might have been filling in for someone who was on leave for short term. Or it might have been they were asked to do a, you know, a short-term initiative, you know, or maybe study, you know, lead a team studying a special issue, like how do we improve attendance or something like that. And that gave them a taste for it, and then sort of recognizing, well, this is something that, you know, that I could do. But the point being, it took someone to approach them, a senior leader, to say, you know, would you take this on? And so it's really important, because I think if senior leaders aren't attuned to this, we could miss out on a lot of people who have potential.
It's actually funny you say that, because I know of a leader who not really keen on being a principal, but they sat in my chair for a little while, and then this boulder rocks up that you have to sign off at the end of each month for the finances. And they came to me and they said, whenever I say maybe I want to be a principal, can you remind me that I hate doing that? So there can be the opposite with the experiences, like I'm not interested in that.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Ray. And I have said, please tell me that I do not want to be a principal. So tell them that. So that's, you can all hold me to account. I say, I'll be a principal.
It's super interesting listening to your pathways to leadership, so classroom, school leadership, and you're all really in some sort of system or sector type leadership role now. You know, how has the system or sector leadership role really helped your growth? But if you were to go back to a school tomorrow Are you a better leader, different leader? You know, how does that impact you going back?
Thank you for asking the question I wanted to ask. That was
So you had it written down.
That's it.
Go first.
Yeah, Fiona and I just had this discussion. I think, hand on heart, I would be a much better leader now, just for my exposure and opportunities that I've had over the last 3 years at AISWA. If I'm honest, and Fiona and I said, you know, we've got some cringeworthy things that I look back on about how I, you know, maybe conducted myself or decisions I made where now I'm thinking, oh, I believe I went about it like that, or, you know, whatever it might be. So I think, Phil, in answer to your question, I would be a much better leader now for the experiences that I've had. Yeah. And I still toy with the idea. I miss campus. Phil and I, sorry, I keep talking about Phil because he's my new buddy next to me at the AISWA office. We share an office side by side, and we went down to Albany, and we went down to an independent primary school, and I just felt at peace being there. Thought, oh, you got any jobs going? You know, I love still when I do go out and I work alongside exec teams, I still always try and force my way into a bit of a classroom and, you know, just fill my cup a little bit. Yeah. But then tomorrow you can ask me and I'll love what I'm doing in the office. So it's just given me a really heightened overlook of opportunities that are out there.
It's a different dance though, isn't it? The dance of where you are in
Definitely.
corporate to the dance you do as a principal to the dance. Yeah.
Yes. And on any given day, it's either the tango or it's the beautiful waltz. And that's the glory of being in the vocation that we're in.
Yeah, I echo everything you've said. Gosh, where would I start? That's what I now question. I think one of the things when you step out of your school into system leadership, you do get that the wider view and you start to understand the jigsaw and the connections, how the system architecture works together. Where when we're in our schools, sometimes we don't get to see all those big moving pieces. You know, and we often joke about this with the other principal advisors that we're a system in a system as a school. And then even within our schools, we have a system. And one of our colleagues we work with describes it a little bit like a cow. You know, they munch the grass in the paddock, which goes into the big system that then goes into the different stomach system, and it goes on and on and on and on.
And where's the analogy?
When I got seconded out and came into this system, actually, I came into this role, and the director at the time called me, I think 3 days before I started, and said, there's been a little bit of a shift, and I'm putting you into the COVID team. And I was like, oh, I think you might remember these times.
I was talking about this scenario.
And, I was like, oh, okay, great. And that was probably the biggest experience of leadership in my life, of very different leadership style that we were required to do in COVID time. So that was my first step into the system. Yeah, it was very hierarchical, command and control, because we all had those emergency guidelines and operating guidelines, which in a way is an easier form of leadership. You've been told to do something, you do it. Trick is, I at the time wasn't in my school or a school, but the complexities was for everyone in a school during COVID, trying to figure out, oh my gosh, how do I do this and maintain relationships and students first? Anyway, I'm sidetracking. I think, honestly, from what I've learned now, just from leadership theory, but really that massive mind shift in that you've got to know who you are first as a leader and all your goods and bads and uglies. And then you've got to understand where your lanes are to play in terms of leadership and in terms of the different leadership structures in your school. And you need to really support everyone else to understand that, because like we've all said, when we went into leadership, no one actually stopped and said to me, well, Fee, now you're not in the classroom, you're deputy. This is what is expected of you. other than the timetable and all the operational stuff, no one else told me I was meant to be developing other people and not saying I'll do it for you or I'll get the whiteboard markers or whatever I need. And same with principalship. When I went into it at that time, no one said, Fee, now you're not a deputy and you're principal, other than this compliance list, this is how you lead other people. So now that I have that knowledge, I'm very keen to put it into play. I'll still stuff it up, but
As long as you fail
Give it a
forward,
crack.
that's
Yeah.
it.
And it is fascinating. I know when I was a deputy under Dr. McNeil, he got me to do everything, and I mean everything from the stuff like just do that, that's get ready. And then when I became principal, he said, now the first thing you have to do is stop doing all the stuff I got you to do. But you know how to do it.
That's
Yeah.
amazing.
I said, just so you know how to do it. So it really is an interesting space. Has anyone got any probing questions or so far, or Barbara?
It's been fascinating, loving listening to all of the perspectives. When we're thinking about aspiring leaders and that your roles that you have, the roles that you do have within schools and now more systemically, what's sort of one piece of advice you give to someone who was thinking about stepping into leadership, and one key piece that you think would be a really good reflective piece, but something that would actually encourage them to take that next step. So what is it that you would do?
Me personally, can I start? I would really have them look at the inside of who they are, who they want to be as a leader. That is like a 101 for me. If you go into it not understanding the different leadership styles and the different leadership theories, and you're learning that on the go, I wouldn't recommend that. I feel like that's where I was. I think having the lead in and knowing the attributes that you would like, and it's as easy as this, really, as a starting point. Think of some really, really good leaders you've had and what made them a good leader in your eyes. And then the opposite, think about the leaders that you had that you cringe about and why. That is a really good starting point to internalize for yourself the first step in leadership. You cannot lead anyone else until you know who you are as a leader. That would be my takeaway. Yeah.
I would say, get yourself a mentor.
Yeah.
I mean, I was really lucky in all of those roles because I had people kind of urging me to do it. In most cases, they became my mentor as well. And because when you're a novice leader, all of these tensions and challenges that you encounter, you're often encountering them for the first time. And so having someone you can run your ideas by, and maybe they're in your school or maybe they're outside of your school, depending on your role. But I think it's really important to have, if not a mentor, some kind of network that you can tap into and share your ideas. Be transparent about, this is a big challenge. If I do this, these bad things will happen. If I do that, those bad things will happen. What do I do?
Yeah.
This is what I'm thinking. What are your thoughts?
I'm a bad person.
I'm a bad person. Yeah, I think we need that. I think we need that.
Yeah. And if not that, in a formalized way, a critical friend,
Yeah.
at least, that can
Yeah.
speak open and honestly with you.
Yeah, I would absolutely echo both of those sentiments. I'd probably, how would I put it? So I guess the biggest thing I learnt was, for me, I was a doer. I was very much get things done, and always doing do. And so what I actually learnt is that I need to really stop focus on the what of leadership. It's more about the how. And that's all about, and this is my leadership mantra to myself, human before business. And there's two reasons for that. One, because of who I am and my values and beliefs. I could easily fall into just getting on with the business.
And make a
And,
transaction.
Yeah, and being
Yeah.
quite happy and ticking a to-do list, because it's hard dealing with people. And when you move into leadership, you are in a people pipeline and you're about influencing. So it really is about human before business, building trust. And I really encourage people to read a lot of Covey's work who talks about character and competence equals trust. That had a huge impact on me. So human before business. So understand who you are, make sure you've got the networks around you because you're going to need them, particularly for your well-being, because leadership's hard. It's work. It is actually work. It's hard work. And then very much make sure that you're connecting with people first before you're talking about the business of what has to be done.
And I have the same mantra. Mine's just a little bit different.
Yours probably
Connection
worded
before
better.
content. That's always for me. Always make that human content. Yeah, connection before any of the content, which is your business.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, I'm aware of time and I'd like to offer an opportunity for us to mingle and maybe you can speak to the panellists individually. Before I throw my last question to you, I'll round up, but I'll let the panellists finish off. The key takeaways for me is build your capacity, however that is, whether that's through watching people, developing mentor, reading is always a good one, but build your capacities come through.
Yep.
Fiona's point about there is no balance. There is no such thing as a life balance. It's about doing the things you need to do at that time and then putting something aside. And then being in the right place at the right time in both these cases. And that's potentially a pathway to leadership. If you build your capacity, you understand that there is no balance and you're in the right, put yourself in the right place at the right time. And you'll never know when the right time is, but you'll know it's the right place because you get the offer. They're probably the key things to pathways to leadership. So I'm going to throw it back to you to finish off with though. And coming from understanding from where you came from to where you are now, there's a lot of hindsight in there. Just leave you with the question to answer to finish off. Do you think our current pathways to leadership are enough?
I think we're evolving and we're moving in the right direction, but I think there needs to be other parallel pathways to leadership. And I could talk to you for quite a while about my thoughts on that and what the ideal would be. I'd love to do a couple of studies. But no, I think there needs to be more emphasis on not just the managerial skills as such. I think there needs to be, initiative, future focused. I feel like relational adaptability needs to be more humanized, if I'm just going to, be really clear.
No, that's what it's about.
And I feel like leadership needs to be reframed to pedagogical influence. I think you need to have lived the experience as a teacher to be able to move in to a leadership role with authenticity. That's my
Wonderful answer. And Darren, you've got a huge policy background and theory and research to that, so I'm sure you could add.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not so sure about how to answer that in terms of the formal structures that are in place. But when I'm thinking about pathways to leadership, I'm thinking also about like what goes on informally in schools, and how do we identify potential leaders and support and encourage them and develop them in that situated context of the school. And this is where some of the conversations that I've had with middle leaders have been a little bit discouraging along the lines of well, I don't know if I want to go any further because I'm just given all this compliance work to do, And so how do we help people have opportunities where, yes, they see that reality of there is that stuff to do, but also there's authentic leadership opportunity that can actually be quite exciting, stimulating, like intellectually and relationally, and that can make a difference in students. At the end of the day, that's, I think, what we're trying to do as leaders is make for better opportunity for students and
I think
families.
students should be at the center of every decision that's made. Every decision.
So how do we help people shift away from thinking, oh, this is just compliance to tick boxes. To maybe some of these compliance things are opportunities, like that, the cases of those principals in Hong Kong and the UK, that we can actually leverage this to make a difference, and that requires some creativity. You know, so that's kind of what's in my mind. Not exactly a, you know, a pathway that's clearly defined, but
That creates lines of inquiry, so that.
Yeah.
Fiona, you get to leave us with your pearls of wisdom.
Oh, I
close
wish
off
there was
tonight.
some. I'm under pressure. I really do agree that it depends. We have to broaden that view of leadership. So we can't just say, leadership is when you progress in a career pathway from, you know, a level 3 to a level 4 to this or that. Our informal leaders are there every day. And there's some really great work happening in the department right now about growing the leadership behaviours and skills in informal settings, you know, through our AIEOs and other leaders there. And I think we've got to also remember that, yes, there should always be a student focus in terms of where we lead in education. But there's leadership with people, there's leadership with operational and technical skills. We've also got to really look into our cultural leadership as well, ways of knowing, being, doing, and making sure that we're accessing our communities in terms of leadership in that way. And Ray, you and I both worked on school boards. You know, there's leadership that comes from our board members there as well, and all different areas. So I think as in career pathways, I think we're at a very exciting point in the department where there's some great things coming to support it. But I think we need to continue spreading the word that, you know, leadership is not just the compliance rationale of ticking boxes and getting stuff done, but it is still a part of it.
Thanks. So, a round of applause for our. Thank you.